Hello, everybody. This is Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. There's tremendous violence taking place in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And naturally, we've got our in-house expert on all things Africa and global affairs. Eric, let me read to you this excerpt from a news story about what's happening with the M23 rebellion. To put this into context for our off-leash viewers, the Rwanda-backed M23 rebels have recently captured Goma, a key city in North Kivu province, leading to thousands of people, including prisoners, fleeing in desperation. This capture has been described as a critical escalation in the conflict, marking the most significant territorial gain by M23 since 2012. The DRC government has accused Rwanda of supporting the M23, which Rwanda denies, countering that the DRC supports anti-Rwandan militias. This is just top line.
Ndabasuje mwese abakurikiye ibiganiro bya TV Yohereje. Nje ubagezaho ikiganiro nitwa Mark Serena, nkaba ndi kumwe n'impuguke akaba n'inzobere cyane mu byo gukemura ibibazo by'ingufu kuri uyu mugabane w'isi dutuyeho, ari buze kutuganirira ku mutwe w'iterabwoba w'inyeshyamba wa M23. Uyu nta wundi uretse Eric Prince, boss wa Sirinavi Blackwater, umutwe w'abarwanyi bikorera ku giti cyabo ugizwe n'abakomanda bo mu rwego rwo hejuru rw'isi barenga 25,000 bazwi muri operasiyo ziteye ubwoba zamenyekanye ku isi. Uyu munsi rero kamera zacu turazerekeza muri Congo, avuga ubwicanyi burenze ubwenge bwa muntu bukorwa na Paul Kagame, perezida w'u Rwanda, n'umutwe w'inyeshyamba wa M23 agumiza guhereza intwaro, ibikoresho n'inyeshyamba ze RDF guteza umutekano muke, aho izo nyeshyamba zibasira uduce dukungahayemo amabuye y'agaciro yinjiza akayabo gakabakaba miliyoni 600 z'amadolari buri kwezi. Izi nyeshyamba zikaba ziherutse gufata imijyi mikuru ya Goma na Bukavu. Ifatwa ry'iyo mijyi yombi byahuhuye bimwe mu bibazo by'ubutabazi, kugera imiryango, kugezaho imiti, bifungurwa n'ibindi bikoresho by'ibanze ku miliyoni isaga y'abakuye mu byabo bikiri ikibazo cy'ingote. Iyo ntambara kuva aho itangiriye imaze guhitana ubuzima bw'inzirakarengane miliyoni zisaga 15, ndetse n'abenegihugu babarirwa mu bihumbi by'amajana bakuwe mu byabo, barimo n'imfungwa zaturutse amagereza, bakaba barararwa ntambi aho kugezwaho imfashanyo y'ubutabazi bigoye. Imiryango ya UN Congo iguma kenshi kurega leta y'u Rwanda gufasha uyu mutwe w'iterabwoba wica abenegihugu, kwiba no gusahura amabuye y'agaciro ku butaka bwayo, nyamara u Rwanda ibyo birego rugakomeza kubihakana.
All this is going down right now, and there's tremendous humanitarian crisis happening as a result of this. Eric, the Congo is a massive piece of territory on the continent of Africa. It's got a very sordid past and history. Walk us through what's happening right now, and then we'll go back into history as well.
Well, what's happening right now, they say the M23 rebels. The reality is that is a surrogate of the Rwandan military run by Paul Kagame. And it started, look, the Rwandan genocide, of course, happened in 94. And you had part of the Rwandan society, the Hutus, started abusing and a genocide against the Tutsis. And the FDLR, which was that Hutu extremist organization, some of them fled to Eastern DRC. And supposedly the M23 rebels were there to fight against them. But the reality of what it's become is a massive theft organization making about $600 million a month in gold, in cobalt, tin, tantalum, all the high-value minerals coming out of Eastern Congo are taken in areas managed by this M23 gang, supported by Rwandan special forces. Rwanda posts all sorts of high numbers for exports of minerals. None of those minerals are actually produced or mined in Rwanda. They're all stolen from DRC. So in this last go, where they've seized Goma, which is a key city in eastern DRC, right on the north end of Lake Kivu, there was some Romanian security guys, a PMC, that were holding out, and they held out against about 5 days of attacks from M23. And then finally the Rwandans said, to hell with it. And they invaded with a full mechanized brigade, armored personnel carriers, even tanks, and using armed Turkish TB2 drones to take the city of Goma. So this is not some internal guerrilla spat in eastern DRC. This is an invasion of a sovereign government into the sovereign territory, taking lots of sovereign territory of the DRC solely over minerals, resources, and the value that Rwanda is looting out of eastern DRC. There's about 130 various armed gangs, but obviously M23 is the one that is state-sponsored. They also get some help from Uganda, because again, the Ugandan, the UPDF, the Uganda military, is also making huge money off the theft and the trafficking of gold, diamonds, coltan, the thing that makes your cell phone or the battery in your electric vehicle. The top line export from DRC is $37 billion a year in everything from copper to lead to nickel to coltan, cobalt, all the minerals that make the high-end batteries, the NPDR minerals, and of course, diamonds as well. Massive. It's estimated there's $25 trillion of value in the ground in the DRC. And the neighbor, in this case, Rwanda, has gnawed off a chunk and is trying to devour it. And it's funny how some people get up in arms about Russia lopping off a chunk of Ukraine, rightfully. It was Ukrainian sovereign territory. In this case, you have DRC sovereign territory that has been gnawed off, and I would say hacked off by Rwanda by force of arms to perpetuate the theft and stealing of these minerals. And for all the apologists for Rwanda in DC, I have to call bullshit on them, because this is Putin-like behavior in terms of trying to adjust the borders of your country by force of arms.
ifite ibimenyetso byose amahanga arimo na UN, akaba nta na kimwe leta ya Kigali yahera gukwepa ibyo birego na Congo hifashishijwe ibimenyetso simusiga. Kuva mu 2012 uwo mutwe urwana kwigarurira igice cya Congo burasirazuba. Byatanzwe n'ikipe ya diplomasi ikuriwe na madamu Kayikwamba Teresa Wagner, naho u Rwanda yo ikarega Congo gutera umutwe wa FDLR inkunga, ndetse irega gukomeza ibikorwa bya jenoside yo muri 1994 mbere yo guhungira muri Congo. Ikibazo gihangayikishije amahanga isaha ya none, kuko Eric Prince ukubutse mu rugendo rwe yagiriye muri Burasirazuba bwa Congo areba uko ikibazo cy'intambara mu karere giteye n'ingamba zafatwa ngo gikemuke burundu, agiye kudusobanurira muri kino kiganiro na Mark Serena. Ngewe basomera kino kiganiro nitwa Imirimbanyi Muhima. Mbere yuko mu ijambo nabibutsaga ko Congo cyari igihugu cyaranzwe n'amahoro mu mateka yose yaranze akarere k'ibiyaga bigari. Wagira ngo udusobanurire uko ibintu bihagaze, nyuma ugaruke no mu mateka y'uko byagenze mu gihe cyatambutse. Eric Prince avuga ko nta M23 ibaho ari ukubeshya, ahubwo ni umutwe ugizwe n'abasirikare b'abarwanyi ba Paul Kagame yitoranyirije kandi akanaha amahugurwa yo hejuru. Kandi iki kibazo ntabwo gitangiye none, kuko ni amateka yaranze guhangana gushingiye ku nyota y'ubutegetsi hagati y'abahutu n'abatutsi mu Rwanda, bamwe bigira inzirakarengane naho abandi bagafatwa nk'abagome be kurimburwa na leta ya Kigali. Nyamara byose bishingiye mu gushaka umutungo uhishe munsi y'ubutaka bwa Congo ubarurirwa mu matiriyoni n'amatiriyoni y'amadolari atabarika. Ubwo abahutu batsindwaga intambara bahungiye muri Congo, akaba kuri Eric Prince ariga Paul Kagame kwica abanyekongo aho gushaka inyeshyamba za FDLR, akaba ari inzirakarengane zihirwa kandi nta birwanisho zifite. Icyaha gihanwa n'amategeko mpuzamahanga akoreshwa mu gihe n'ahatari mu gihe cy'intambara. Paul Kagame rero mu gufasha M23 yakabaye ashyira ibitero bigamije gusenya no kurimbura ibigo n'ibirindiro by'uyu mutwe wa FDLR niba koko ariyo ntego y'intambara, ariko byakunze kugaragara M23 yibanda mu duce dukungahayemo amabuye y'agaciro, aho imibare igaragara ko muri iyo ntambara Kagame yabashije kwinjiza 600,000 by'amadolari y'amanyamerika mu bucuruzi bw'amabuye ya zahabu, kobalte, Korta n'andi mabuye y'agaciro yose acukurwa muri Congo, akaba ava mu duce tuyoborwa na M23 abifashijwemo na Rwanda Special Forces, ari umutwe w'abarwanyi b'abakomando bashinzwe kurinda umutekano wa Kagame, akaba ari boherezwa kurinda inyungu za shebuja wabo bavogera ubusugire n'imbibi za Congo ntacyo bikanga na gikeya. Eric Prince yongeye gusubiramo amagambo yabajijwe na Minisitiri Nduhungirehe mu kanama ka UN, aho u Rwanda rukura amabuye ku isoko mpuzamahanga rugaragara ko rucukura ari menshi, ntabwo ndetse nta n'ikirombe rugaragaza mu Rwanda, ahubwo ukuri ko kuri nuko ajyanwa ku isoko mu buryo bw'amagendu yibwe, kandi akaba ariho amaraso y'abanyekongo. Ubwo hafatwaga umujyi wa Goma ari wo murwa mukuru w'intara ya Kivu, hari umunyarumaniya uzwi nka PMC wahaye ikiraka nk'umucancuro kurwana agafata umujyi wa Goma mu minsi 5 gusa. Umujyi warafashwe n'abarwanyi bayobowe na KMC, nyuma Kagame yavuze ko abarwanyi bose bari mu maboko ye. Abo barwanyi ba brigade ya 4 yo mu ishami ryo kurashisha ibibunda binini 4th Mechanized Brigade bitwawe n'ibimodoka by'indwano n'abazirwanisha, abandi bafite imbunda kabuhariwe zo muri Turukiya TB2 drones gufata umujyi wa Goma mbere yuko basubira mu bihugu baje baturukamo banyuze mu kibuga cy'Ikanombe mu Rwanda. Ntacyo amahanga yashatse kuvuga, kuko abo bacancuro bari boherejwe n'ibihugu by'amahanga bangaga kumena isosi yabo mishishi, kandi koko niko amakuru benshi twayabwiwe. Eric Prince avuga ko atari intambara yoroshye, kuko ni ibihugu byinshi byateye kandi birwanira muri Congo bigafataho ubugwate abaturage b'akarere bagamije kwisahurira umutungo, ubukire ndetse n'amabuye u Rwanda rwiba rukanasahura muri Congo. Muri Congo, Eric Prince nk'uko ejo yabisobanuye mu kiganiro, afite abahanga mu by'iperereza no kuneka bakorera ku isi yose, ndetse leta z'ibihugu byinshi zikunze kwiyambaza blackout expert mu bijyanye no gutara amakuru ku bihugu bimwe ku bindi, aho yavuze ko muri Congo hari imitwe yitwaje intwaro irenga 140 harimo na M23 ihabwa ikanaterwa inkunga n'igihugu cya Uganda gifite abasirikare bacyo UPDF ku mirongo y'urugamba, aho Uganda yinjiza akayabo mu bucuruzi bw'amabuye y'agaciro ya zahabu, Korta, kobalte na diyama icyo gihugu kiba muri Congo. Aya mabuye akaba arimo akorwamo amatelefone agendanwa, batiri z'imodoka zikoreshwa n'umuriro. Amabuye yashyirwa ku isoko ava muri Congo abarurirwa mu gaciro ka biliyoni 37 z'amanyamerika ku mwaka, mu bucuruzi burimo muringa, Korta, zahabu, kobalte, nikeli. Ayo mabuye akorwamo amabuye ya PDR tutibagiwe na diyama. Imibare yakozwe n'impuguke z'abahanga zashyize ahagaragara ko leta ya Congo ifite mu butaka bwayo umutungo ubarurirwa mu matiriyoni z'amadolari y'amanyamerika 35, mu gihe igihugu cy'igituranyi ari cy'u Rwanda nta n'urwara rwo kwishima rufite mu butaka bwarwo, ariko rukagerageza uko rwagwigarurira. Eric Prince akaba yibaza ukuntu intwaro zigira mu mutwe w'abarwanyi zivuye mu Burusiya zivuga ko zigiye kurwana muri Ukraine zikaza gusangwa zirimo kurashishwa mu karere, aho u Rwanda rushaka gufata Congo hakoreshejwe ingufu z'imbunda ngo rubone uko rutangira noneho gusahura ku mugaragaro umutungo w'icyo gihugu. Eric Prince yavuze ko ntacyo ashaka kumva Paul Kagame yiregura mu ntambara yashoje muri Congo n'ibyaha byose bimuri ku mutwe, mu kababaro n'amarira yasanze abakuye mu byabo mu nzira y'umusaraba barimo kunyuramo bitewe n'intambara yabasize iheruheru. Eric yafashe ku munwa ko bidakwiye ko amahanga aguma kurebera amabi nk'ayo akorerwa inzirakarengane z'ikindi gihugu akicecekera, yanzura ko ibikorwa nk'ibi bigayitse, bikaba bikwiye ko amahanga ahaguruka bikarwanwa bwivuye inyuma. Kuva mu gihugu iki n'iki ugahagurutsa ingabo n'intwaro z'uburyo bwose ugatera ikindi gihugu byarinda ugakoreramo amahano nk'ayo, blackout boss yiboneye n'amaso ye uko ari abiri bigomba kurwanwa. Eric Prince yasobanuye neza ko ikimuzanye muri Congo ari uguca no kurimbura intambara z'urugomo no guca umuco wo kudahana inkozi z'ibibi wamunze leta zimwe iyo ziva zikagera zigahanirwa amabi zikorera abaturage babyo zitaretse no kwibasira abaturage babyo hafi imyaka isaga 35 mu karere. Asaba ko habaho ibihano ntangarugero uhereye ku bayobozi bakuru ukamanura kuri buri wese uzahamwa n'ibyaha bya jenoside, ibyaha by'intambara, ibyaha byibasiye inyoko muntu n'andi mahano yose nk'uko byatanzwe muri raporo ya UN n'imiryango itegamiye kuri leta ikorera mu karere.
Really fascinating stuff, Eric, because, you talk about this is an invasion from a neighboring country, and it's not getting any attention whatsoever, certainly even in global media, very, very limited attention. And as you say, the eastern portion of the country seems to be very mineral rich. But obviously, the DRC is vulnerable to this sort of invasion. Tell us a little bit about sort of the security apparatus run by the DRC government and the election going back to December of 2023 that got us here.
So the December 2023 election was when President Tshisekedi was reelected. It's a huge country. It has a lot of issues. I mean, you driving around the country, a lot of the roads look more like a swamp and very lumpy. And what should take, a few hours to go 200 miles takes 30 days because it's that rugged. So the logistics and the movement of anything in DRC is a challenge. So difficult also for the DRC government to project law and order, combat power, et cetera, to defend all its borders. And because of the massive amount of wealth and the lawlessness and the various gangs, there's 130 different armed gangs that are effectively resource robbing gangs. It's just made for some really bad secondary effects. Something like 80% of the women in Eastern DRC have been raped. Imagine that. Not 8%, 80%.
Wow.
So the criminal lawlessness of if you give completely lawless people the access to more money and more weapons centered around the minerals trade, you get to an even greater level of chaos, and that's what persists in the DRC. So the Congolese military trying to stand up to that is not great. And there's, like with any third world military, there's generals that are there for the take to line their pockets, and there are some that want to fight and do their patriotic duty. And, we have that across the board, even in Western militaries as well. Some generals, some officers are there to fight and get a job done, and there's a lot of bureaucrats. And the DRC has a big mix of the latter right now.
Yeah, I'll tell you, that's stunning. An 80% of women having been raped. And, yet people on the left, that they're so concerned about women and women's rights, and there's no outrage. There's no cry for help for these people. And in fact, I don't know how reliable this statistic is, but the United Nations reports over 7 million people have been internally displaced in the DRC. And that's before the M23 takeover of Goma. So probably even more people have been displaced in the meantime. What a tragedy. And yet the international community is not responding in any way that I can see.
Well, and again, the UN and the UN peacekeeping approach for the last 50, 60 years globally has been a complete farce, and it has devolved into a big circle of corruption, right? So you have UN peacekeepers there from very third world countries with ill-trained, ill-equipped troops, not well paid, but they're issued firearms and ammunition, and they end up selling those firearms and ammunition to some of these 130 different gangs in exchange for gold. Well, if you were to check the footlockers of the so-called peacekeepers that were being sent home, you would find in most cases those footlockers are lined with little gold dory bars. It's just a 1 kilogram bar of field refined gold That is the reality of how pathetic and corrupt the UN peacekeeping is. I hope that's one of the next things Team Doge goes after, is just gutting the financing. The U.S. finances, I think, 28 to 35% of all UN peacekeeping, and it's an absolute sham.
Wow.
It is what they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the idea of a UN peacekeeping force, nice idea, horribly executed, and there's hundreds of millions of people suffering unnecessarily because of that level of incompetence and corruption. And so the DRC is in a tough situation right now because their resource area, North and South Kivu, are some of the richest terrain in the world, and it's been invaded and locked off by their well-armed neighbor, including, also the Rwandans were using Israeli-provided spike missiles against sovereign Congolese forces. So it's a big problem, and it'll be interesting to see what the neighbors do about this kind of invasion in the Congo.
bikaba bitangiye gushyuha aho Eric patro wa kompanyi y'abacanshuro izwi ku izina rya Blackwater yamaze guhabwa impapuro na leta ya Donald Trump ngo yerekeze muri Congo Burasirazuba. Iyi sosiyete ikora ibintu byinshi birimo icuruzwa ry'imbunda z'ubwoko bwose, indege z'indwano, satelite, imodoka by'intambara ndetse no kohereza abacanshuro barwanira mu mazi, mu kirere no ku butaka bazwiho ubuhanga butagereranywa. Nibo Eric Prince nyuma yo gukora inshingano zabo neza mu mitwe itandukanye igize igisirikare cya Amerika, ahita agirana na kontara muri izo kampanyi ye zigenga ku izina rya Blackwater. Bakaba bagiye kwerekeza mu burasirazuba bwa Congo guhangana n'umutwe w'abaparakomando ba Kagame bitwikira izina M23 RDF AFC. Eric Prince yagiye gukomeza tuganirira ibibazo by'umutekano muke wagarutsweho cyane muri Congo ndetse n'uko amatora y'umukuru w'igihugu yagenze mu Kuboza 2024. Amatora y'umukuru w'igihugu yabaye mu 2024 yarangiye Tshisekedi yegukanye itsinzi ku mwanya w'umukuru w'igihugu. Gusa nyine ibibazo biragoye kubasha kugera mu bice byose by'igihugu kubera imihanda mibi. Akenshi imihanda iba yararengewe n'amazi, bitoroshye gukora urugendo ukoresheje inzira y'ubutaka. Aho urugendo rwa kilometero 100 rwakagombye gukorwa mu masaha make mu mihanda myiza, akenshi muri Congo ukoresha iminsi irenze 4. Itwarwa ry'ibintu ndetse n'abantu muri Congo ni ikibazo cy'ingorabahizi kuri leta ya Congo. Gutangiza no kugenzura ibikorwa ku butaka bwayo no kubasha gucunga ubutunzi bwayo bwose ni umurimo utoroshye ugereranyije n'ubushobozi bwa Congo. Ku kibazo cy'ubukungu iyo leta ifite ndetse n'ibyo bibazo twabonye haruguru, nibyo aya matsinda y'inyeshyamba 140 yuririraho ngo abone uko yiba asahure umutungo wa Congo. Bigomba kurwanwa ku kiguzi cyose Amerika izatanga. Eric Prince yavuze ku kibazo cy'intwaro ikunze gukoreshwa n'inyeshyamba za M23 ariyo gufata ku ngufu abari n'abategarugori barimo n'utwana duto, aho 80% by'igitsina gore bafashwe ku ngufu. Nyamara imiryango ivuga ko ivuganira abari n'abategarugori ku isi ntaho numva izamura amahano nk'ayo agumya gukorerwa bagenzi babo bo muri Congo. Naho raporo ya Amerika yerekana abakuwe mu byabo mbere ya Goma na Bukavu bifatwa bari barenze miliyoni 7, ubamaze kurenga kuri uwo mubare. Nyamara imiryango y'ubutabazi ntabwo irashyira hanze ubufasha bwo gutabara bari mu kaga muri Congo Burasirazuba uko byari bikwiye. Uyu mutwe w'iterabwoba M23 ntabwo ari wonyine, ahubwo ni igikoresho gifite imbaraga cyashyizweho gusahura umutungo kamere w'amabuye ya Congo. Coltan, cobalt, zahabu aribyo bikorwamo aya matelefone, ordinateri, computer na bino bikoresho by'ikoranabuhanga by'igihe tugezemo. Bityo rero bakaba bishatse kuvuga ko ino ntambara ntayihuriye no kwigarurira uduce, ahubwo ni intambara y'amahanga igamije kwigarurira uwo mutungo no gusiga bateye hejuru abenegihugu ba Congo n'akarere bose muri rusange. Icyo kikaba ari wo mutima w'intambara irimo kuyogoza akarere. Bisaba ko buri bihugu by'ibihangange byicara bigafatira Perezida Paul Kagame ibihano bikwiriye, hamwe n'abanyirabayazana bose bakomeza gushora akaboko muri ino ntambara. Eric yibukije ko inshingano ya buri gihugu ni ukutaguma kureberera akarengane kuko birimo kubera Goma ntabwo ari ikibazo cy'abanyekongo ahubwo n'indorerwamo y'icyitwa umuntu iyo ava akagera. Bitwereka uko bigenda mu gihe cyose isi ikoze ikintu bikagera aho bizamba mena aka kageni. Yongeraho ko hakwiye guhagurutsa amahanga, ababuze ababo bagahabwa ubutabera ndetse n'abagaragaye bagize uruhare muri ayo mabi n'amahano bagahabwa ibihano by'intangarugero, isi ikareberaho ntibizongere kubaho ukundi. Eric Prince yanasobanuye neza ko buri gihe cyose imbunda zikiri mu maboko y'inyeshyamba zidafite amategeko zigenderaho uzazereka aho zikura umutungo n'amafaranga, ibivamo nta kabuza ni intambara n'urugomo rukabije nk'uko raporo zibyerekana muri Congo. Eric asaba FARDC, ingabo za Congo, gukora iyo bwabaga ikirwanaho. Ibihugu byose bikiri mu nzira y'amajyambere bifite ukuntu igisirikare cyabo cyubatse. Hari abajenerali baba bafite inshingano zo gupanga urugamba, hakaba n'abandi baba barebwa gusa n'imirwano. Ibyo ntabwo ari muri Afurika gusa, n'Uburusiya niko biteye. Habaho abajenerali kabuhariwe ku mirongo y'urugamba, hakaba n'abandi bakora imirimo itandukanye, buri wese akubahiriza inshingano z'igihugu yiyemeje kurwanirira ndetse akanabirahirira. Eric Prince yasobanuye neza ko ibi byose byatewe n'uko UN yagiye kenshi yohereza ingabo zikomoka mu bihugu bitandukanye muri iyi myaka ishize hagati ya 40 kugeza kuri
peacekeeping
60.
forces, if you see the light blue helmets run, and
Yes.
and the lack of outrage is incredible. This article says the European Union canceled its observation mission due to logistical issues, and the East African community was also not present to observe due to accreditation problems. Sounds like a lot of bureaucratic cowards to me who are scared to death of entering, this war-torn nation. And that yet people suffer and people die in the process. You've taught us a lot here, Eric, on Off Leash about this great disparity between wealth beneath the ground in some of these African nations, and yet how corruption prevents the proper leveraging of that to the benefit of their own population. Do you think President Tshisekedi has a chance at trying to bring some order to the country and correct this assault from the Rwandans? What does he do from here? What would your recommendation be?
They need to do a lot better job on the PR side of actually raising the alarm that they've been invaded, that a opposing neighbor has gnawed off a chunk of their sovereign territory and taking serious money away from the Congolese people. Two, they need to actually build some capacity to push back and to police their borders. I was 8 years ago, I chartered an airplane and I flew all over Eastern DRC into all these different UN bases because I just wanted to understand what it is they were supposed to be doing versus what they were actually doing. And so landing at all these bases and driving around, I did it over a 6-day period. I can say I've been to every airfield in northern, central, and mostly southeastern DRC, and driven a 30 to 50 kilometer radius around those towns and villages and flown over the whole area at low level. It is rugged terrain. The UN is beyond inept and corrupt, and the Congolese forces are overmatched. And Rwanda, which has been stealing hundreds of millions of dollars of resources, have reinvested into weapon systems and military, which they've plowed in and taken more of their neighbors' terrain. So it's headed in the wrong direction. I don't know that the U.S. isn't going to do something about it, but it does matter to U.S. supply chains, because whether it's copper, cobalt, coltan, all those key minerals that go into making our electronics, electric vehicles, phones, etc., comes from there. And Dodd-Frank, that passed into law, requires a conflict-free supply chain for those minerals. And Rwanda is making it 100% conflict-based supply chain right now. So it's revisit this in 3 months, and we'll see if anything's changed. But trajectory is not great right now, and Rwanda needs to stop.
Yeah, recently, Eric, here on Off Leash, we had a conversation and did an episode about what's happening across the continent of Africa, and the worst violence since 1946 has broken out in about 19 different nations, if I remember correctly. Is that part of the problem for the DRC? Is that this invasion is taking place within the context of this continent-wide spate of violence and attacks and militia attacks that's going on? Is that part of the problem with drawing attention to this crisis?
Well, yes, it's easy for conflicts to get lost in the noise because there's so many of them across Africa, whether it's up in the Sahel with all kinds of jihadis, threatening even in northern Nigeria, people can't be out after 4 p.m. because they're at such high risk of banditry or being killed all across the north of Nigeria. And that's a country of 250 million people. So yeah, the amount of bad news in Africa is at all-time high. In this case, yeah, there's a jihadi group called the ADF, kind of the local ISIS affiliate. But the main problem is this is a brazen, unvarnished, unlimited land grab, resource grab, wealth grab by Rwanda and even by Uganda of their somewhat weaker DRC neighbor, and they're doing it because they can.
yateshutse cyane ku nshingano zayo, aho benshi muri bo bamunzwe na ruswa. Abo basirikare benshi bava mu bihugu bikennye bidafite ubushobozi ndetse bitanahemba neza, nyuma rero bagahitamo kugurisha ibikoresho byabo bahawe na UN bakabaha garama zitarenze 40 za zahabu. Nibwo bucuruzi abitwa ko bakorera UN bajemo muri Congo. Ibyo nushaka kubireba neza uzashake izo ngirwa abasirikare ba UN niba bava mu butumwa bw'amahoro bagarutse iwabo, uzasanga bafite ikiro kimwe cya zahabu itunganyije neza bakuye muri Congo baba bashyize mu bikapu byabo. Aho niho uzahita umenyera neza ukuri bw'ibyo bita abasirikare ba UN boherejwe mu butumwa bwo kubungabunga amahoro n'umutekano. Eric akaba asaba ko ikipe igiye koherezwa aho ishami rya finance rya Amerika ritanga inkunga ingana na miliyoni 28 kugeza kuri 45 z'amadolari y'amanyamerika agenda kuri izo misiyo, ariko bikaba bibabaje ko nta musaruro na muke bitanga. Uburyo ibikorwa by'ubutabazi no kubungabunga amahoro bikorwamo na UN bikwiye rwose guhinduka, kuko hari ubuzima bw'inzirakarengane amajana ibihumbi basiga ubuzima bwabo kubera umuco mubi wa ruswa ndetse no kutagira uburambe ku kazi ngo abasirikare bakora inshingano zabo kinyamwuga mu butumwa boherejwemo. Leta ya Congo iri mu bibazo bitoroshye na gatoya kuko yatewe n'ibihugu by'ibituranyi, cyahawe ibikoresho n'amahugurwa akomeye. Twavuga nka mesire zo muri Israeli zo guhanura indege no gusenya imodoka by'intambara, akaba ari byo birimo gukoreshwa muri Kivu y'Amajyepfo. Eric yongeye guhamagarira Kagame gukura ingabo ze muri Congo hakiri kare, kuko abona ko agasuzuguro kagirirwa igihugu kidafite impamvu n'imwe abenegihugu bacyo bagumiza kwicwa mena ako kageni. Eric yasabye kugira icyo avuga ku myitwarire y'ingabo za Casque Bleu ndetse n'iza EAC zanze kurwana zigatinya urugamba, aho ikinyamakuru cyanditse ko Union Européenne ifite ikibazo cyo gukora kumeza gufasha kubera mikoro makeya. Ese ntibyaba biterwa nuko abasirikare batinye kwinjira ku mirongo y'urugamba gutabara inzirakarengane birinda ko bibasirwa nabo bakagwa ku rugamba, bagahitamo gutererana inzirakarengane bitwa ko baje gutabara. Eric yongeraho ko ubutunzi bwa Congo aribwo buhindukira kwicisha abanyekongo kubera kudacungwa neza, byazahaje ibikorwa by'amajyambere rusange, nyamara ibihugu byabo bikungahaye ku mutungo kamere wakabaye ishingiro fatizo ry'imibereho myiza y'abenegihugu bose muri rusange. Eric yasobanuye neza ko Perezida Tshisekedi yagerageje gusubiza igihugu mu buryo kuvugurura uburyo hatangwa serivisi nziza mu bene gihugu. Agaragaza ko imirimo minini yakora aramutse ariwe muvugizi wa leta nuko yabwira amahanga kumufasha ku gihugu cye cyatewe ku mugaragaro n'igihugu cy'abaturanyi gifashwa n'amahanga mu gusahura amafaranga amamiliyoni n'amamiliyoni by'amadolari biba abaturage ba Congo. Icya kabiri yakora ni ugushyiraho ubushobozi bituma Congo ishobora gucunga umutungo wayo neza. Mu myaka 8-10 ishize avuga ko yagize amahirwe yo gutembera mu burasirazuba bwa Congo mu butumwa bw'akazi, aho yarashinzwe kureba no kumenya imikorere ya UN, niba ibyo boherejwe gukora ari byo birimo gukorwa cyangwa bikorera ibyabo mu buryo butandukanye n'ubwo bari barakizeho. Agira ati, nazanaga n'indege bikaba ngombwa ko nzunguruka n'imodoka ku buryo butari bunyoroheye na gatoya mu gihe cy'iminsi 6. Nabashije kureba uko ibikorwa by'umuryango wa UN bihagaze uhereye mu majyaruguru, hagati, burasirazuba n'amajyepfo. Ubariyemo n'amaradiyo akorera mu mujyi no mu byaro, byose byarangiritse. UN ntacyo ishoboye, yaramunzwe, aho ubukungu bwa Congo busahurwa n'amamiliyoni amajana n'amajana y'amadolari butwarwa mu Rwanda, aho ukoreshwa mu kugwiza intwaro no kuvugurura igisirikare cyabo, aho usanga rwose kuri bo basahura umutungo babifashe nk'aho ari ishema badakwiye kureka, nyamara barimo berekeza mu ikorosi rikomeye cyane kwivanamo. Ntabwo nzi niba hari icyo Amerika iteganya kubikoraho, ariko ntacyo byaba bimaze na gatoya kubona Amerika ishyiraho hagomba kwerekanwa uburyo ayo mabuye acuruzwa ku isoko mpuzamahanga abonekamo, mu gihe amabuye nk'umuringa, koruta, kobalte akoramo ibyuma bya elegitoronike, imodoka zikoresha ikoranabuhanga, ayo mabuye yose ava mu Rwanda. Ibihugu byose byari byasabye amasosiyete akomeye agura amabuye y'agaciro mu bihugu by'i Burayi na Amerika ko hazajya habanza kugaragara aho ayo mabuye aturuka mu turere turimo intambara, nyamara muri abo bose ntawe utewe ko amabuye u Rwanda rushyira ku isoko 100% byose abavuye mu duce twafashwe n'inyeshyamba za M23. Nkaba nteganya ko mu mezi 3 nzongera gusubirayo nkareba niba gahunda hari icyo yahindutseho, ariko aho mberukira nta kiravugururwa na gito. U Rwanda rugomba guhagarika iyo mikino uhereye none. Eric Prince yagize icyo asubiza ku biganiro byahise kuri TV of Reach, aho ibihugu byinshi bigera ku 18 biri mu ntambara ku mugabane wa Afurika kuva mu 1946 bikaba birimo kurwana. Nuko wabibona nk'umuhanga mu bya diplomasi mpuzamahanga, Eric yagaragaje ko ibitera intambara muri Afurika bidasaba impamvu nini cyane, kuko abantu bimuka buri munsi nko mu bihugu bya Saheli, aho inyeshyamba za jihadisi nko muri Nigeria hakunzwe kuvuga cyane ubujura bwitwaje intwaro, aho usanga buri gitondo ari abantu bishwe. Ibyo rero nk'uko we abibona, atekereza yuko urugomo rufite uruhare runini cyane kugira ikibazo nk'iki. Nko muri Nigeria hakunzwe kuvuga cyane ubujura bwitwaje imbunda, aho usanga buri gitondo ari abantu bishwe. Ibyo si ibintu bidasanzwe, kuko muri Nigeria ubwayo ifite abaturage miliyoni 250. Gusa yerekana ko muri Afurika ibitera intambara kenshi harimo jihadist group ari itera inkunga ADF, ISIS group, kandi ibibazo by'imipaka, imitungo ndetse n'ubukire byugarijwe na Uganda ndetse n'u Rwanda, ku buryo ari igihugu gifite intege nke kitabasha gucunga neza uwo mutungo, bigahitamo kuwusahura binyuze mu ntambara. Eric yasabye gutanga umucyo ku ngamba Donald Trump aherutse gufata zerekanye n'ingamba za Afurika ko hazajya harebwa ibikorwa bigamije gusa inyungu za Amerika mu bijyanye n'inkunga igenerwa ibihugu bya Afurika, aho atanga umucyo ku mpungenge Washington yari ifite zari zishingiye ku mabuye y'agaciro akoreshwa mu nganda zagurwaga cyane cyane mu Bushinwa ndetse n'Uburusiya. Ibyo bihugu bikaba byaratangagwaho miliyoni amajana n'amajana y'amadolari, ariko inyungu Abanyamerika abibonamo ikaba ntayo, kuko nta misoro ku mfashanyo ibaho, kuko ibihugu byose biri mu ngorane z'intambara birasaba leta y'Amerika kubifasha ndetse no gushora imari muri ibyo bihugu mu rwego rwo kuzahura ubukungu bwasenzekaye.
Really fascinating, and yet so tragic, and it's hard to see into the future, and hard to imagine it's only going to get worse. Let me ask you this, and we'll exit on this question, Eric, is as President Trump, of course, has been working at lightning pace in literally just a couple of weeks in office so far. It's obviously that time hasn't come yet for him to define an Africa strategy based on the national interests of the United States. What might be your recommendations for the president as it relates to Africa, and it relates to this crisis in the DRC in particular?
So, there's a lot of concern in Washington about Chinese and Russian influence pushing into a lot of parts of Africa, controlling those supply chains that the U.S. needs for our manufacturing base. I would argue that, for the hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars that we spend and waste every year on the continent of Africa, the taxpayers get very little return for that. And the fact is, those countries that are in trouble want U.S. help. They want U.S. business. They want U.S. investors. And the myriad of Byzantine laws that the U.S. has put in place really prevents the private sector from helping in all the ways that we can, helping these countries stop their jihadis, bring rule of law, secure their borders, collect taxes, all the basic elements that an economy needs for capital formation, for a safe and secure population. And I am very happy to see the cutoff of USAID, because there's so many malign NGOs that have been doing the wrong things, reinforcing the wrong things all across Africa. It's at least a positive step in the right direction, and there's a lot more reforms to be done. And I think I'll save the rest of the analysis, because that's probably an entire episode of what we should do in Africa.
And an excellent point about USAID. The left's got their hair on fire because Elon Musk is wise enough to have some of the smartest software coders and experts, IT experts in the world, camped out with him in the old executive office building late at night on weekends. And he says, there's 2 days of the week that the opposition isn't even on the playing field because we're here all the time. And one of the greatest focuses is USAID.
I would say the Dems are not even working on Fridays or Mondays either. I did see a video.
Yes.
I saw a video on one of his team members, smart kid from the University of Nebraska, who figured out using AI how to read some scrolls that were burned from Pompeii, like from 64 AD, that were rolled up, burned, but he somehow figured out how to digitally unroll them and read and decode the Latin and Greek writing on these scrolls. Amazing. And I think they called it the Vesuvius Project that he won. But that's the kind of brainiacs that he is directing against the federal bureaucracy, and they are clearly overmatched by that kind of talent.
Ibihugu bituriye ubutayu bwa Sahara barifuza yuko Amerika yashora mu bikorwa rusange muri ako gace mu bijyanye no gutanga umutekano ku mipaka y'ibyo bihugu, kwaka imisoro ndetse n'ikoranabuhanga nkenerwa mu bukungu, no guhanahana amakuru ngo bashobore guhangana n'ibitero by'inyeshyamba za jihadiste. Ese Eric Prince akaba umwe mu bashimishijwe n'uko inkunga yagenerwaga ikigo cy'Abanyamerika gishinzwe gutsura amajyambere mu bihugu byinshi bya Afurika, USAID, yahagaritswe, aho imishinga yari yarateshutse ku nshingano zayo mu bihugu byose muri Afurika. Ubu hakaba hari byinshi birimo kuvugururwa, gusa hari bimwe mu byakozwe bizaguma gushyigikirwa, ariko si byose. Aha yabivugiye ko umushinga USAID ubusanzwe wakoranaga na CIA kuva kera cyane, ukaba harasohotse amamiliyoni menshi y'Amanyamerika. Abavuga amagambo nk'ayo bagereranya n'igihe leta y'Amerika yafashaga igihugu cya Vietnam kwiyubaka no kuzahura ubukungu bwacyo, ariko ntabwo ariko ibihe isaha uyu munsi bimeze. Eric avuga ko USAID yari yarabaye ikigega abatavuga rumwe na leta y'Amerika birwaga basahuriramo, aho imiryango idashingiye kuri leta yirwaga buri mwaka irigisa miliyoni ziri hagati ya 42 na 45 z'Abanyamerika buri mwaka. Nyamara nta na kimwe byinjirizaga leta y'Amerika, ariko amamiliyoni amajana akaguma gusohoka nta mpapuro zerekana inyungu uko izo nkunga ziba zinjiye, imisoro iba yazitanzweho nayo ntigaragare. Ibyo rero akaba ari byo Allen Skin yita ko bamwubikiye imbehe. Elon Musk avuga ko USAID aricyo yari imariye Afurika mu kuzahura iterambere ry'ibihugu bikiri mu nzira y'amajyambere, mu gihe Eric Prince we yemeza ko ari uburyo abademokarate bari barashyizeho bwo gufatanya n'abanyapolitike bagashyira amafaranga y'imisoro ya leta mu mifuka yabo no guhereza asigaye imishinga yo muri Afurika niyo wajya kugenzura umusaruro w'izi nkunga imyaka yose ukabibura. Bityo kuva USAID yahagaritswe ni intambwe nziza yo gucunga neza umutungo wa leta kukoreshwa neza. Imikorere ya USAID ni y'abademokarate bashyigikiye ko akayabo kaguma gusukwa mu bikorwa bitagirira akamaro abaturage rusange. Kuri Eric abona ko gusesagura bikaba bidakwiye kongera kubaho ukundi mu buyobozi bwa Donald Trump. Iki ni igihe cyo kubazwa ibyo leta zikora, kikaba ari intambwe yari idasanzwe yaba igiye guterwa nyuma byinshi bikavugururwa muri Amerika.
Panic because he's targeting, among other things, USAID, which clearly, at least purportedly, has been a front for the CIA for a long time. And, you know, Africa is one of the places where they've wasted a lot of U.S. taxpayers' dollars. Last word to you, Eric.
I wouldn't even, maybe they got that reputation from the Courts program back during the Vietnam War, which was actually an effective stabilization program. But really, USAID has become a massive money laundering organization for the left, supporting thousands of NGOs with no accountability, putting out $43 billion a year to not be very effective overseas, but to continue to give hundreds of millions, if not more, billions of dollars to Democrat politicians to keep the money flowing. It's a very, very insidious flow, and I'm really glad it's been interrupted.
Yeah, interrupted with a timeout and a total review for accountability, the kind of thing we've never seen in the American government. Look, amazing as usual, very, very important insights about this humanitarian crisis. You can only get that here on Off Leash with Eric Prince, with Eric's expertise and insights about what's happening in this war-torn country. That's it for this episode of Off Leash with Eric Prince. I'm Mark Serrano. Don't forget to go to unplug.com/offleash for your unplugged phone today. Until next time.
Ikiganiro cyabaye cyiza cyane, reka tugicumbikire hano. Mukomeze gukurikirana ibiganiro byacu kuri TV of Reach, aho tuzajya tubagezaho uko ibintu byifashe hirya no hino, aho amazi yanyu atagera tuba twahababereye. Mwari kumwe na Eric Prince ndetse na Serrano naho ubutaha. Naho rero iyi nkuru niba yagukoze ku mutima, niba kandi yatumye utekereza neza kurushaho, nimukwiye kureka, ahubwo ni ukumenya ukuri kwinshi mukeneye kumenya, n'indi ntambara nayo mukwiye gusobanukirwa neza. Nimucikwe kwiyandikisha kuri runo rubuga Impirimbanyi Muhima, kandi mushobore no kubona video ukurikiyeho aho muza kumenya byimbitse kurimo kubera kuri ino si. Twese hamwe